In one day, 23,000 casualties occurred. Not only was the Battle of Antietam the bloodiest morning in history, that was when the deadly fissures in the Confederacy suddenly came into view. And there was only one man who stood up for what was right. General James Longstreet, who was most trusted by Robert E. Lee, anticipated the catastrophe. Soldiers who are starving, a rash strategy to divide their force, injuries, pride, and a risky bet to attack the North crippled the commanders. Although Longstreet's report presents a much worse picture of arrogance, chaos, and a submerged road flowing in blood, history portrays Lee as a tactical genius. In addition to Union gunfire, the South was doomed by shattered leadership, disregarded warnings, and a desperate general who was forced to load cannons with his bare hands as his world fell apart. The sanitized narrative of the lost cause is not this. This is Antietam as seen by the man who experienced it firsthand. He fought with Lee, witnessed horses exploding in mid-command, and shouted harsh realities while his own staff collapsed around him. Stay put. Everything you believe to be true about America's deadliest day will be altered by what Longstreet revealed. The actual narrative begins here. To help our community, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel before we start. As Longstreet underlined, the situation necessitated a quick military response, with a strategic change targeting Potomac crossings. In order to prevent additional fighting in the Virginian territory, Robert E. Lee and his officers agreed that it was now necessary to launch an offensive. Confederate troops quickly sprang into action. Longstreet began to move across the Potomac River toward Leesburg. When his divisions reached Frederick, Maryland, on September 7th, some members of the local community welcomed them warmly and offered food and verbal encouragement. Lee suggested redeploying troops to capture Harper's Ferry, putting protection for the Army's rear flank first. Longstreet resisted this tactic, warning that it would be disastrous to split up their forces in the face of adjacent Union threats. Longstreet met with Lee and Jackson at headquarters the next day. They were a physically challenged trio. Longstreet was limping in a slipper from a blistered heel. Jackson was tending to wounds from a horseback accident, and Lee's hands were immobilized in splints following an injury. The Army of Northern Virginia then moved westward, using the hilly terrain as defensive, after Lee only permitted partial reinforcements from Longstreet's corps to support Jackson's campaign, despite Longstreet's call for coordinated attack on Harper's Ferry. This plan was quickly upset by Union operations. On September 11th, Lee sent Longstreet northward after hearing reports of Federal forces moving from Hagerstown. Longstreet became more and more irritated with the Army's dispersal during the march. He pleaded with Lee, "General, I suggest we fortify our position and allow Federal forces to engage us here." The campaign was made worse by harsh weather. Troops were worn out by constant forced marches from Richmond, and as they advanced north, their effective strength was believed to have decreased by 25% due to high rates of desertion. Adding to these difficulties, locals in this Maryland area demonstrated less support for the Confederate cause. Soldiers scrounging for supplies faced verbal abuse, slamming doors, and harsh reactions. Longstreet's corps enjoyed a brief reprieve while based in Hagerstown from September 12th to 13th. When Stuart informed Lee that Union soldiers were moving toward South Mountain through the Catoctin Mountains, this shaky calm broke. As McClellan's army threatened to take advantage of Confederate divisions, Lee and Longstreet had to quickly plan. In order to create reinforced lines and enable coordinated counterattacks against the Union flanks, Longstreet suggested retreating to Sharpsburg. Lee turned down this offer and chose to engage Federal forces at South Mountain instead. Confederate units fought fiercely to hold Turner's, Fox's, and Crampton's gaps. Longstreet forewarned Lee of the coming collapse in the absence of reinforcements due to D.H. Hill's shattered forces at Turner's Gap. Lee approved withdrawal at night. Lee sent soldiers to the ridges around Antietam Creek and retreated to Sharpsburg. Jackson's success at Harper's Ferry coincided with Longstreet's arrival on September 15th. Confederates gathered in anticipation of McClellan's postponed attack until the 17th. The Piper farmhouse, 500 yards south of the sunken road, served as Longstreet's headquarters. Longstreet and Hill were invited to dinner by Henry and Elizabeth Piper, who provided wine. Longstreet objected, fearing poisoning, but gave in when he saw how unaffected Hill was. Officers spent the night sleeping in Portrait. Longstreet and Lee went over defenses on September 16th after breakfast with the Pipers. As expected, McClellan's forces mobilized, and on the 17th, the Battle of Antietam began. Miller's cornfield, the nearby woodlands, and Dunkirk Church were the focal points of the first battles. Before joining Lee and Hill on horseback at the sunken road, Longstreet oversaw operations on the right flank. Longstreet joked, "If you insist on drawing their fire, allow spacing so we avoid their line of sight," pointing to Hill's vulnerable position. Hill's horse's legs were cut off by artillery fire a short while later. As commotion broke out, Longstreet said dryly, "That shot targeted you." Longstreet observed dark humor as Hill labored to get off the flailing horse, despite the somber scene. Hill, this side, the other, number. "Climb over its head or slide backward," he said dryly. The injured horse was put down after being released. According to a staff officer, Longstreet remained composed in the face of criticism, with his only sign of stress being his teeth grinding on cigars. He coordinated reinforcements while keeping an eye on the vicious fighting on the sunken road, which was thereafter known as Bloody Lane, from the Piper farm. It was ineffective to send Richard Anderson's division to Hill's aid. After Anderson was hurt, Roger Pryor took over as commander. Pryor desperately sought assistance as the artillery fire grew very intense. "General," Longstreet replied, "guns en route. No retreat, victory, or death." Union soldiers were able to breach lines due to a disorganized Confederate withdrawal. Miller's battery was sent by Longstreet, but his staff, Sorrell, Gorey, Walton, Fairfax, and Manning, had to manually load and discharge cannons into advancing forces due to crew fatalities. Longstreet ordered canister rounds while mounted amid the confusion, and his makeshift gun crews assisted in putting down the Union advance. Later articles diverted post-battle accolades for his leadership by attributing the day's genuine hero to D.H. Hill. History would forever proclaim that a Virginian had accomplished Hill's achievement. Hill, however, was from deeper Dixie. The only thing stopping Burnside's corps from crossing Antietam Creek was A.P. Hill's last-minute reinforcements. It was America's bloodiest day, with 23,000 casualties at the end of the war. The employees of Longstreet suffered greatly. Walton was shot in the shoulder, Fairfax mourned his dead steed, Sultran, and Sorrell suffered a shell concussion. "Sultran shot, General," he sobbed right in the back. Dryly, Longstreet shot back, "Major, rejoice that it wasn't your back." After helping a Sharpsburg family during a shell-induced fire that evening, Longstreet came late with a cigar in hand, raising concerns that he had missed Lee's command meeting. Lee greeted him with relief. "Speak, my old warrior, and we will follow your advice." Commanders prepared troops food after strategizing, preparing for the uncertainty of daybreak. In 12 hours, 23,000 lives were lost. Antietam's fields weren't merely covered with blood. They sank in the broken illusions of the Confederacy. James Longstreet witnessed everything. The buried path littered with dead, the broken command, and the disregarded warnings. However, stories of valiant defeat and exemplary Southern heroes overshadowed his truth throughout history. Consider this. What if Lee had followed his legendary advice? Would the South have been spared if they had consolidated at Sharpsburg? Or was Antietam supposed to be the final nail in a cause founded on arrogance? Longstreet's narrative reveals more than just tactical shortcomings. It rips open the decaying heart of the Confederacy. As cannon screamed, leaders held on to their illusions, trust was broken, and soldiers were starving. However, Longstreet turned into the antagonist when the lost cause changed the course of history. Longstreet rather than Lee, whose hands were restrained by pride and splints. The true question is now, given how unvarnished, visceral, and personal the truth is, why do we hold on to myths? Leave your judgment in the space provided here. Was Longstreet a traitor to the myth or an unheeded prophet?